Karmelo Anthony's indictment. The 17-year-old will go on trial for stabbing 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a track meet in Frisco. Anthony's lawyer just told us they plan to argue it was self-defense.
The shocking story of Karmelo Anthony's parents has taken an unimaginable twist. The FBI has seized their $30 million zero-cents mansion, and the reason behind it will leave you stunned. With his parents now facing charges of first-degree murder, the fate of their extravagant lifestyle hangs in the balance. What led to this drastic move by authorities, and how does it all connect to Karmelo's family? Stay tuned as we unravel the mystery behind this jaw-dropping scandal. The family home of Karmelo Anthony, once a symbol of success and wealth, was suddenly taken from the family in a dramatic and public way. What used to be a pristine estate, with luxurious furnishings and an air of exclusivity, became the focal point of a federal investigation that led to its repossession. The event was a spectacle for the neighborhood, with news vans lining the street, helicopters buzzing overhead, and moving trucks hauling away items from inside the home. The mansion, worth over $25 million, zero cents, had been a proud representation of the family's success. But now it was being reduced to nothing more than an asset to be seized. The reasons for the repossession were deeply tied to the financial troubles of Karmelo's parents, whose criminal charges were connected to the home. They had been accused of serious crimes, including first-degree murder, and during their time in jail, their financial accounts were frozen as part of a federal investigation. In the midst of all this, the family had failed to keep up with the mortgage payments. Despite the grandeur of the home and the status it once brought, the reality was that it was still mortgaged and had unpaid debts. The bank moved quickly to reclaim the property, unable to overlook the missed payments and the frozen accounts. What used to be a quiet, luxurious home with an air of exclusivity was now the subject of public scrutiny and legal action. A red tag notice was placed on the front gate, signaling the end of the family's connection to the property. The house, once a fortress of success and privacy, was now being treated like just another asset to be taken. The neighborhood, which had previously seen celebrity cars and holiday lights, was now filled with the sound of movers and repo agents. The atmosphere had completely changed, from an air of wealth and privilege to one of financial ruin and public exposure. The repossession felt more like a quiet, calculated takedown than just another foreclosure. As the trucks lined up and workers started taking out valuables, the silence of the estate stood in stark contrast to the chaotic nature of what was happening. Neighbors watched in disbelief as items were removed from the once immaculate home. The entire scene felt surreal, as if the family's empire was crumbling right in front of everyone's eyes. What had once been a proud family home, built on success and ambition, was now being stripped down piece by piece. The legacy attached to the house was fading, replaced by the looming uncertainty of the family's future. This repossession marked not just the end of a home, but also the beginning of a larger public spectacle. The home was no longer just an estate. It had become a symbol of the family's downfall. A place that once represented success, but was now tied to scandal and controversy. The public watched as the family's legacy fell apart in real time, and the house, once their pride and joy, became a painful reminder of what had been lost. The financial investigation into Karmelo Anthony's parents has been one of the most closely watched cases in recent months, and it has shed light on a web of questionable activities that led to the collapse of the family's once immense wealth. What seemed to be a story of success, fame, and fortune quickly turned into a complex legal and financial nightmare. Authorities were determined to uncover the full scope of the financial dealings tied to Karmelo's parents, and the investigation would reveal disturbing truths that no one could have anticipated. At the heart of this investigation was the family's luxurious estate, a multi-million-dollar home that once stood as a symbol of wealth and success. But beneath its grandeur, a series of financial missteps, questionable transactions, and frozen bank accounts were quietly unraveling the family's financial empire. This wasn't just about missed mortgage payments, it was about the movement of money, some of which seemed to have connections to criminal activity. It wasn't long before the house became a focal point of the investigation. The property was still mortgaged, and with the parents now in jail, their financial accounts had been frozen, leaving them unable to make the required payments. Authorities quickly discovered that the family's wealth had been built on a series of assets that had, over time, been tied up in questionable transactions. The property, once bought with money from investments in high-profile ventures, was now linked to a series of financial moves that seemed to have been used to mask or hide illegal activities. The family had always been known for their lavish lifestyle, but as investigators began to peel back the layers, they realized that many of the funds that had been funneled into their lifestyle might not have come from legitimate sources. There were reports of large sums of money being moved through various accounts, some of which had been flagged by investigators as suspicious. These funds appeared to come from sources that were either untraceable or tied to illegal activities. Investigators began to look into whether some of this money had been used to fund the extravagant lifestyle of the family, including expensive trips, shopping sprees, and other luxuries that seemed to have no clear justification. The family's access to such resources, while seemingly under financial duress, raised further questions. What had once been considered a savvy financial management system was now seen as a potential cover for something much darker. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that these funds had been used to mask larger problems that the family had been dealing with for years. The financial records were painstakingly reviewed, and patterns began to emerge that hinted at a much larger systemic issue. The documents and transfers that were reviewed indicated not just personal expenditures, but also the potential for money laundering and other illicit financial activities that had been cleverly hidden under the guise of legitimate business ventures. With this growing evidence, authorities began to believe that the family's wealth might have been sustained by illegal means, and the trail of financial transactions started to point to something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. But the family's financial troubles were not just tied to their extravagant spending and lifestyle. There were also issues with how the money had been funneled into the mortgage payments on their mansion. Documents released in the course of the investigation revealed that the mortgage payments were not just linked to the family's income from legitimate business ventures, but also tied to accounts that had already raised suspicion. The investigators found that these accounts had been flagged for irregular activity and transfers of large sums of money that couldn't be properly accounted for. As the investigation deepened, it was discovered that these accounts were connected to what seemed to be a shell corporation designed to hide the flow of funds. The company had a complex structure with multiple offshore accounts, making it difficult to trace where the money was coming from and where it was going. In many cases, the payments appeared to be funneled through layers of different companies and accounts to disguise their true origin. The financial web was growing increasingly intricate, and it became clear that the family's financial dealings were not as transparent as they had once seemed. The investigation also looked into the specific purchases made by Karmelo's parents. They had been known to buy expensive jewelry, cars, and other high-end items, but many of these purchases were now under scrutiny. Some of the money spent on these items appeared to be linked to the same questionable accounts that investigators were examining. The purchases raised more questions about where the funds had come from and whether they had been used for personal gain or to mask other financial activities. With these discoveries, the legal and financial stakes began to rise. The family's actions had not just led to their financial downfall, but had also contributed to the overall criminal investigation into their activities. The investigation, which started as a look into the family's finances, began to take on a much larger scale. What started as a probe into missing mortgage payments and financial irregularities now had the potential to uncover a much broader web of criminal behavior. This included not just financial mismanagement, but also illegal transactions, money laundering, and other activities tied to the family's wealth. As the public learned more about the investigation, questions began to surface about the role of Karmelo Anthony in all of this. While he had not been directly implicated in the financial wrongdoing, the public scrutiny and the criminal charges against his parents left a cloud of suspicion over his name. Was he aware of his family's financial troubles? Had he unknowingly benefited from these activities? And, perhaps most importantly, how would this scandal affect his legacy? While Karmelo's career had been built on his talent and hard work, his family's legal troubles and financial misdeeds now threatened to overshadow everything. The once proud estate that had symbolized success and prosperity was now at the center of a financial and legal storm that showed no signs of slowing down. For many, the investigation into the family's finances wasn't just about repossession or foreclosure. It was about understanding how a story of success could turn into a cautionary tale of greed, corruption, and financial mismanagement. In the end, the financial investigation into Karmelo Anthony's family revealed much more than just unpaid debts and a foreclosed home. it uncovered a network of questionable financial dealings, shell companies, and suspicious transactions that had hidden the true source of the family's wealth. And while the story may have started with a single repossession notice, it has since become a much larger story about the lengths some will go to protect their wealth and the consequences that come when those efforts are exposed. The public reaction to the repossession of the Anthony family home has been as chaotic and unpredictable as the events themselves. For months, the once provocative estate had been a symbol of success, wealth, and the promise of a fresh start for Karmelo Anthony and his family. But as the legal and financial troubles began to unravel, that same mansion became the epicenter of a scandal that captivated the local community and spread far beyond. What once had been a private sanctuary was now a spectacle for everyone to see. Neighbors and the public alike watched in disbelief as the situation evolved, unsure of how to respond to the unexpected fallout. It started with murmurs among the neighbors. They had seen the luxury cars coming and going, the lavish holiday lights decorating the massive property, and the quiet, almost secretive nature of the family's lifestyle. To the outside world, the Anthony estate had always been a symbol of prosperity, a testament to the hard work and success that came with being part of such a prominent family. But now, the house that had once stood proudly behind its stone gates was no longer a place of peace. Instead, it became a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change and how the consequences of one's actions can ripple out into the community. As news of the repossession spread, the neighborhood grew uneasy. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors slicing through the air with an urgency that seemed out of place for such a quiet suburban area. News trucks lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching up toward the sky as reporters camped out in front of the property. The once pristine lawn, which had been a perfect example of wealth and success, was now a site of quiet destruction. The house that had once been the center of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and personal milestones was now being slowly dismantled. For many of the neighbors, the situation was surreal. They had watched the Anthony family from a distance, often admiring the lifestyle they had built and wondering about the privacy they kept. But now, those same neighbors were left with more questions than answers. Some stood on their porches, watching as the moving trucks rolled up and down the driveway, quietly packing up the once valuable belongings from the estate. There was a sense of disbelief in the air, mixed with a growing curiosity about what had really happened behind the scenes. Some whispered about the family's sudden rise and fall, wondering if they had seen the cracks in the foundation before, and others were simply shocked by how quickly things had gone south. What really stood out to many of the neighbors was the silence that surrounded the whole ordeal. No one knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of the estate. Was it Karmelo Anthony himself who had been involved in the decisions that led to the repossession? Or was it just his parents? The lack of clarity made the situation all the more unsettling. For those who had lived near the Anthony family for years, it felt like a jarring shift from the peaceful, quiet neighborhood they had known. As the weeks went by, the public's reaction became more polarized. Social media erupted with opinions, and soon everyone seemed to have something to say about the repossession of the Anthony family home. Some defended Karmelo, claiming that he wasn't responsible for the actions of his parents. They argued that the real problem lay with his parents' financial mismanagement, and that Karmelo was just another victim of their poor choices. These supporters pointed to the fact that Karmelo had worked hard to build his career, and that the family's financial troubles were not a reflection of his character or his success. On the other side of the debate, critics were quick to seize on the drama. Many felt that this was the inevitable result of years of questionable behavior and financial decisions. Some even suggested that the whole situation was a calculated move on the part of Karmelo's parents to protect their assets, using their son's fame and success as a shield. The critics were unforgiving, claiming that the family had lived above their means and that the consequences were now finally catching up to them. The foreclosure and repossession were, to some, seen as a form of poetic justice for those who had built their fortune on the backs of others and had been so reckless with their wealth. Neighbors, too, were torn. Some felt a sense of sympathy for the family. They saw the public humiliation of the repossession as something that could have happened to anyone. After all, people in the neighborhood had seen the Anthony family struggle behind closed doors, and many understood that wealth and success didn't always protect against personal or financial turmoil. Some neighbors even expressed their support for the family, offering prayers and words of encouragement as the family faced the public fallout. It was clear that many were invested in the outcome, wanting to see the Anthony family overcome this dark chapter in their lives. Others, however, were less sympathetic. The drama of the repossession had played out in front of their eyes, and it was hard to ignore the stark contrast between what they had once seen as a picture of success and what was now an unraveling nightmare. The neighbors who had once looked up to the family now found themselves questioning everything they had assumed. Was the family really as perfect as they had appeared? Had they been living a lie all this time? For some, it felt like a betrayal, and the fallout from the repossession only deepened the divide between the Anthonys and the community they had once been a part of. As reporters and news outlets continued to cover the story, the public's interest only grew. The situation quickly spiraled into a media frenzy, with every detail of the family's financial woes being picked apart and analyzed. The once purple family was now on display for the entire world to see. The question that lingered on everyone's mind was whether this was just the beginning of a much larger scandal that would continue to unravel as more information came to light. With each new revelation, the story grew more complicated, and the lines between sympathy and criticism became increasingly blurred. For Karmelo Anthony, the situation was more than just a financial crisis. It was a deeply personal issue that carried the weight of family loyalty, reputation, and public image. As the eyes of the world turned toward him, many wondered how he would respond. Would he stand by his parents despite the growing controversy? Or would he distance himself from their actions? The pressure on him was immense, and as the media continued to speculate, the public's expectations only added to the burden. For the neighbors, the situation remained a delicate balance of curiosity and discomfort. Some watched in silence, unsure of how to react, while others expressed their opinions more openly. But the one thing that everyone seemed to agree on was that the Anthony family's downfall was a stark reminder of how quickly things could change. What was once a symbol of success and prosperity had turned into a cautionary tale for those who believed that wealth could shield them from the consequences of their actions. As the months passed, the story of the Anthony family continued to captivate both the local community and the wider public. The house that had once been a private sanctuary was now a public spectacle, its walls holding secrets that no one could have imagined. The neighborhood, once untouched by scandal, had become the backdrop for a dramatic and unsettling chapter in the lives of one of the most famous families in the world. And as the world continued to watch, the question remained, what comes next for the Anthony family, and how will this saga play out in the end? Karmelo Anthony's response to the shocking events surrounding his family's financial collapse and the repossession of his parents' home has been one of quiet reflection and silence. Despite the media frenzy, the public scrutiny, and the increasing pressure to address the situation head-on, Karmelo has chosen a more reserved approach. His demeanor throughout the crisis has been measured, avoiding the inflammatory rhetoric often seen in high-profile scandals. This response, or lack thereof, has sparked much debate. For some, it's a sign of strength and maturity, while for others, it's a reflection of the deep internal conflict he's likely facing. One of the most telling moments came as Karmelo left the courthouse after a recent hearing. As cameras zoomed in on his face, the emotions were evident, though he didn't speak a word. He walked through the flurry of media without an entourage, without a spokesperson, and without the typical celebrity defenses. The silence spoke volumes. His ability to remain composed in the midst of public turmoil showed a side of Karmelo that many hadn't seen before. For someone used to being in the spotlight for his basketball career, this situation, steeped in personal and legal complexities, was something far different. Karmelo's silence, however, hasn't shielded him from the public's eye. With every passing day, more details emerge, and it becomes clear that the challenges he's facing go far beyond legal battles or financial troubles. The emotional weight of his family's predicament is visible in his demeanor. The repossession of his parents' home, a property that once symbolized their success, now represents a downfall that is not easily ignored. The house had once been a symbol of everything Karmelo had worked for, not just in his basketball career, but also in the belief that he could help his family rise above their struggles. Now, it's a symbol of failure and shattered dreams. The home, with its pristine lawn and towering gates, now stands as a cold reminder of how quickly life can change. The bigger picture here is about more than just one family's financial troubles. It's about the intersection of wealth, image, family loyalty, and the consequences of actions that have now become public knowledge. For many fans and members of the public, Karmelo Anthony has always been a symbol of success. He's been the face of a brand, a professional athlete who reached the pinnacle of his career and represented his community. His image has been carefully curated over the years, with his achievements both on and off the court being celebrated by millions. But now, that image is under intense scrutiny. For the first time in his life, Karmelo is being forced to confront the darker side of fame and success, the parts of his life that had always been kept behind closed doors. The situation with his parents has revealed just how complex and vulnerable the world of high-profile athletes and their families can be. The trust that many placed in him, both as a basketball player and as a public figure, is now being questioned by the very public that once idolized him. The emotional toll on Karmelo is undoubtedly immense. Imagine being in his shoes, watching your family's reputation, once untouchable, unravel in front of the world. The people he has worked so hard to protect, those who had supported him through thick and thin, are now at the center of a scandal that could change everything. For someone who has always been in control on the basketball court, having to relinquish that control in the face of such personal turmoil must be incredibly difficult. His quiet response might be his way of processing the situation, trying to protect whatever dignity he has left in the face of a public relations nightmare. Some might argue that Karmelo should speak out more forcefully, defend his family, and clear his name. However, in the realm of public opinion, that could open the door to even more questions, more doubts, and more speculation. In some ways, remaining silent might be the smartest course of action. By choosing not to comment extensively on the situation, he avoids further inflaming the controversy. Instead of fueling the fire, he's allowing the legal process to unfold, hoping that time will reveal the truth and that the public will eventually see things from his perspective. However, his silence hasn't gone unnoticed. His lack of public response has drawn both support and criticism from various quarters. On social media, some fans have expressed empathy, understanding that Karmelo might be struggling with what's happening to his family. Others, however, believe that he should be more vocal in defending himself and his parents. The divide is clear. Some feel for him, while others feel frustrated by his inability or unwillingness to address the situation head-on. The emotional weight of this case is not just about Karmelo and his family. It has wider implications, especially in terms of how the public perceives athletes and their families. This story has highlighted the fragile nature of fame. While Karmelo's basketball career may be secure, his personal life and the life of his family have been thrown into chaos. The public's obsession with celebrity culture has created a system where the personal struggles of individuals are dissected and analyzed by millions. This constant scrutiny can be exhausting, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as family. For Karmelo, the question now isn't just about how he responds to the situation, but also about how he rebuilds his image in the eyes of the public. His career on the basketball court may have brought him global recognition, but his actions off the court will now determine how he is remembered long after his playing days are over. In many ways, this situation represents a turning point for him, both personally and professionally. As the legal proceedings continue, Karmelo's next steps will be closely watched. Will he speak out more about the events that have shaken his family, or will he continue to keep his emotions private? How will this scandal impact his future endorsements, relationships, and his place in the world of sports? What's certain is that the story is far from over, and the fallout from these events will have long-lasting consequences. For Karmelo, the challenge isn't just about winning a game, it's about navigating the most difficult and personal trial of his life, one that will test his character, resilience, and ability to rise above the storm.